Hello! Today we're gonna explore an effect that might sound a bit boring but is often highly overlooked as a creative tool, the gate. We'll be looking at the basic idea and controls of the effect first, and then we're gonna check out a series of creative applications. Now, what exactly is a gate? Well, in a way a gate is the opposite of a compressor. While a compressor reduces the volume of a signal that exceeds a certain threshold, represented by the blue line here, a gate works the opposite way. It will reduce or even completely cut out the signal when it falls below that threshold level. I personally often use them when working with vocals to clean up noise in between phrases. Because when a vocalist records in a less acoustically controlled environment with a lot of background noise that might be coming from the streets or an air conditioning unit, a gate can automatically silence the background noise or even breaths in between phrases.
iPhone, Nairobi, time zones, limestone, iPhone.
Also, when working with drum recordings, gates are essential to, for instance, cut out bleed from cymbals or snares in a kick drum mic. But there's a lot of ways to use a gate creatively too, so let's look at the basic controls first. The threshold is the key control here, setting the volume level a signal must exceed to pass through the gate. The floor level determines to which volume the signal is reduced when the gate is closed. When set to minus infinity, the signal is completely cut out when it's below the threshold level. There's also a few time-based controls that you'll find in pretty much any gate effect. The attack time controls how quickly the gate opens after the signal crosses a threshold. After the attack phase, the hold time kicks in, determining how long the gate stays open, even if the signal drops below the threshold level in the meantime. Once the hold time ends, the release time controls how long it takes for the gate to return back to floor level. On the left we'll find the three last advanced controls. The look ahead will introduce a slight delay to the signal, allowing the gate to respond more accurately to fast transients. There's also the flip switch, which lets you audition the part of the signal that's being gated out, and the return dial sets the difference between the threshold level that opens the gate and the level that closes it, which can reduce choppiness in certain cases. Cool, now that we've covered the basics, let's see how we can use the gate creatively in our music productions. Okay, so let's kick things off with our first technique, where we'll be using the gate's sidechain input to add some groove and movement to a static pad sound. Now for this example, I made a dusty house groove and added a pad sound to it, which sounds like this. I really like the chords and the timbre of this pad, but it feels a bit boring and disconnected from the drum groove. To give it a bit more texture and excitement, I added two parallel instances of Soundtoys Crystallizer in an audio effect track. The first layer creates a grain delay style effect and is pitched up an octave, while the second layer does the same thing but is pitched up 2 octaves. To enhance the stereo width, I panned one layer to the left and the other one to the right. Now let's add some groove using our gate effect. I'm gonna add the gate to our pad sound channel and open up the little sidechain submenu. Now with the sidechain activated, the gate now listens to the track we send into its sidechain input. Whenever the sidechain signal now crosses the threshold, the gate opens, allowing the pad sound to play in rhythm with the track that's sent into the sidechain input. To give the pad some groove, we're gonna need to send a signal with rhythm and a lot of sharp transients into the sidechain input, because these transients will trigger the gate by crossing the threshold. If I think about transients and groove, I immediately think of a drum break, so let's see which one I found. The tone of the drum break doesn't matter for this technique, we're only focused on the rhythm of the drum hits as they'll dictate the groove of our pad. To enhance the transients even more, we can play around with the preserve settings and decrease the sustain of each drum hit. You want to make sure to mute the drum break as we're only using it to trigger the pad's gate, not as a part of our song. Now let's head back over to the pad channel where we'll select the drum break as the sidechain input on our gates, and let's mess around with the settings to see if we can come up with a cool rhythm. By moving around the thresholds, we can control which transients cross it. The lower the threshold level, the more even the quieter drum hits will exceed the threshold level and trigger the pad. A longer release time will make it sound smoother. By increasing the floor level, we're sending back in some of the pad's body. Let's A/B the pad with and without the gate. And paired with the drums. Now let's make the pad move along to the drum groove by sidechaining it to the kick. By automating the release time, we can make the groove a little more dynamic and evolve over time. By holding Option or Alt and dragging, we can turn a linear line into an exponential one. Let's delete this modulation and see what happens when we map an LFO to the release time. Tiny adjustments to the LFO's depth and offset parameters can have a big impact on the modulation, so it's important to be precise to get the desired effect. I personally love setting the LFO rate to a non-integer value for a cool polyrhythmic groove. You can further adjust the groove by rearranging the drum break that's triggering the pad, allowing you to experiment with different rhythms and timings to shape the overall feel. The only thing we're still lacking in this musical idea is a nice and warm bass line, so I've added in some sustained bass notes to go along with the chords. If you don't have speakers or headphones with good bass response, it can be helpful to use an EQ to visually check if you're hitting the octave with the best sub content for the notes you're using. I like using the MIDI Pidgey device to quickly shift the notes an octave up or down without having to go into the MIDI clip and doing it manually. By shifting the notes down an octave, we can clearly hear and see that we're hitting the right frequency range and getting those warm, deep subs that we want. Next up, I'll add an auto filter to isolate only the deepest low end of the sound. I'll use the MS2 filter type, which is inspired by the iconic Korg MS20 filter, and I'll increase the drive to add some extra fatness and volume. To give the bass the same rhythm as the pad, I'll copy over both the modulated gate and the compressor that's sidechained to the kick. Let's see what the bass and the pad sound like when combined. It's sounding a little muddy in the low end, but we can fix this by EQing out some of the bass from our pad. Cool, the bass now grooves perfectly with the pad, so let's listen to the entire loop and hear how it all comes together. Now in this case we're using a drum break played by an actual person, which gives us a more organic rhythm. However, if you're aiming for a more sequenced robotic groove, you can trigger the pad's gate with a programmed pattern. To demonstrate this, I made a quick trappy idea that sounds like this. For the synth chords, I used a very basic melt patch, applied some EQing, a little chorusing, and sidechained them to the kick. But let's group these effects and get them out of the way. The bass is an Ableton preset called 808 Drifter that is being ducked by the kick. Now let's make the chord smooth by adding a gate to the channel and routing the hi-hats into its sidechain input. If you'd rather have the gate triggered by a pattern that isn't audible in the track, you can duplicate the hi-hat track, mute it, and rename it gate trigger. We'll delete all the notes in the pattern. If we then head back over to the chord channel and set the gate sidechain input to the gate trigger track, it will allow us to create a pattern that controls the rhythm of the pad without being audible in the mix. Let's make use of Live's new MIDI generative tools and have it generate a pattern for us. By playing around with the steps, density, and pattern dials, we can easily tweak the rhythm to find the groove that works best for us. Let me quickly show you how I use this technique to create a choppy bass line in my track Home Again. By gating the high end of my bass to a simple 16-note hi-hat loop, I created a robotic rhythmic groove. If you're a fan of these sequenced gate rhythms, definitely check out GateLab, which is a free plugin by Audio Modern that comes with a bunch of cool presets and stereo options. Now, there's a couple of cool things we can do by combining gates and reverbs. And to demonstrate, I created a dreamy, spacious lo-fi loop using sounds and loops taken from the golden sample pack I recently made for Sennheiser, which you can find on Splice too, by the way. So let's have a listen. It's still a pretty open and rough idea at this point, but there are a few things we can do to jazz it up a little. I've layered in a field recording of some crackle, which has a sweet amount of airy top end to it, which will add nice texture and perfectly complement the lo-fi character of the drums. Now let's use a couple of gate instances to make the crackle groove in sync with the drum hits. I'll route the kick to its sidechain input and tweak the controls until it blends in nicely with the kick. Now let's do the same thing to the snare. Just keep in mind that when using multiple gates on a single channel, we'll need to set them up in parallel using an audio effect track. If we stack them in series, one after the other, the second gate won't open when the snare hits because the first gate is silencing everything in between the kicks. Now that our snare has some nice crackly texture to it, let's duplicate the chain one last time and add some texture to the hi-hats. As we're using a very small and short hi-hat sample here, I'm already gonna decrease the hold and release times. Now let's listen to the entire drum groove with and without the gated crackle. The drums are sounding quite dry at the moment, and since we're aiming for a dreamy, spacious vibe, adding some reverb to the snare might not be a bad idea. I've been using the Soundtoys Superplay reverb a lot lately, so I'm gonna add it to the snare using an audio effect track. As usual, we'll create a chain for the dry signal and a chain for the 100% reverb signal. Before we dive into gating, I'll clean up the reverb with some subtle EQing. There's often some muddiness to be found around 200 Hz, so I'll cut a bit there, and dipping a few dBs in the 1K to 5K range can help smooth things out a bit. Especially when working with vocals, removing some of the harshness in the reverb can make a big difference as it creates space for the vocal to cut through the mix. Without EQ, and with EQ. A lot smoother. By adding a gate right before the reverb and tweaking the settings until we're left with just a short, sharp click, we can dramatically alter the character of the decay. You really want to push the settings to the extreme here to get the shortest click possible. Let's A/B real quick. If we now modulate the release, the reverb's character will evolve over time. I'll add an LFO, map it to the release time, and play around with the settings. By setting the waveform to random, the reverb's character will change unpredictably with each hit, adding a bit of variation and keeping the sound dynamic throughout the song. These small modulations might seem subtle, but they can really add an organic human touch to your song. Now, instead of going for a plate-style reverb, let's try a spring reverb. It's definitely one of those love it or hate it effects, but personally I'm a big fan, so let's give it a shot and see what works here. Normally I'd reach out for one of my outboard spring reverbs, but for the sake of this video we'll use Arturia's spring reverb plugin. It's super flexible and really captures that classic spring reverb sound almost perfectly. I'm gonna set the width to stereo and the blend to 100% reverb as we're using it on a parallel channel. The shorter the click, the more rubbery and boinky the spring reverb will sound. Let's listen to it in context. I'm gonna bring the reverb down just a notch. And there we go, we've added a nice high crackly texture to the drums and turned the reverb into something a little more dynamic and interesting, just by using a gate. Now, by swapping out the position of the gate and the reverb, and thus placing the gate after the reverb, we can easily create that classic 80s snare sound. Here's a very disco-inspired drum loop that I put together. I added the lexicon reverb to the clap that hits on every second snare and narrowed down the reverb using the utility tools with control. If I turn on the gate after the reverb, it will suddenly cut off, creating an almost claustrophobic effect. The hold and release parameters will let you shape the reverb's tail. Now lastly, I want to quickly show you one more reverb related gating trick that I used to enhance a chopped up synth loop in my track Dusty Echoes. Let me quickly show you. The sound you're hearing is a loop I recorded on an Eminent 310 organ and then ran through a Chase Bliss Therme delay pedal. I added a parallel reverb to the synth loop and placed the gate before it so that only the loudest synth hits will trigger the reverb. This creates a rhythmic reverb effect instead of a long tail that washes out the entire loop. Alright, enough about reverb. Let's switch gears and explore how we can use a gate to creatively layer electronic drums with an old drum break to add a gritty, vintage character to our groove. For this example, I cooked up a pretty light Michael Maynard electro soul kind of vibe, consisting of a halftime drum loop layered with a guitar, an acid type sequence that I made using my modular synth, and a fluttery synth loop coming from my Moog Matriarch. We've got guitar chords with some echo. A raw synth sequence. And some weird synth plucks. I then brought in a drum break that I pitched down to match the tempo of the project, applied a gate, and routed the kick to its sidechain inputs. I duplicated the track and did the same thing for the snare. I could have combined the kick and snare gates into a single channel using an audio effect track just like we did earlier in this video, but I chose to separate them here. In a third channel I added the same drum break but at double tempo, which sounds like this. By isolating the shuffling parts of the break that happened in between our kick and snare and then applying a gate to focus in on the transients, we can create a cool, glitchy percussive loop. Do note that we're not using the sidechain input here. If we now bring the programmed drums back in, you'll notice how the gated break adds a raw, organic touch and a nice shuffly rhythm to the mix. You could also manually chop out the parts of the break that align with the kick and the snare, but using a gate makes it way more flexible, as the gated break layer will automatically adjust to any changes you make in the MIDI pattern of your kick and your snare. Alright, that wraps up this video on the creative use of gates. If you have any questions or other gate related tricks yourself, feel free to share them in the comments. I'll see you all in the next video soon. Cheers!